Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand still when your heart is screaming to run, and sometimes the most beautiful gift is someone who sees your fear and chooses to stay anyway. The rain was hitting the windows of apartment B when Jake finally closed the door behind him for the first time. 3 cardboard boxes sat in the middle of the empty living room, everything he had left after the divorce papers were signed. At 34, he never thought he'd be starting over again, but here he was, in a small 2-bedroom apartment that smelled like fresh paint and someone else's cooking. The building was older but clean, the kind of place where working people lived quiet lives. Jake could hear a television playing somewhere upstairs and the sound of footsteps in the hallway. After 2 years of fighting and lawyers and dividing up furniture, the silence in his new place felt both peaceful and lonely at the same time. He unpacked his coffee maker first. Some things matter more than others when you're trying to feel human again. While waiting for the water to heat up, he looked out the kitchen window at the small courtyard below. A few people were coming home from work, umbrellas dripping, keys jingling as they hurried inside from the weather. The next morning, Jake met his first neighbor. He was struggling with his door key when he heard footsteps on the stairs. A woman with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail was carrying a laptop bag and what looked like art supplies. She paused when she saw him fumbling with the lock. "New to the building?" she asked with a friendly smile. Her voice was warm, the kind that made you feel like you'd been friends for years. "Yeah, just moved in yesterday. I'm Jake." He finally got the key to work and turned to face her properly. "I'm Lisa. I live right across the hall in 4A. Welcome to the neighborhood." She shifted her bags to shake his hand. "Fair warning, the hot water takes about 5 minutes to kick in and the guy upstairs practices violin every Tuesday night." Jake found himself smiling for the first time in weeks. "Good to know. Thanks for the heads up. No problem. If you need anything, just knock. I work from home most days, so I'm usually around." She unlocked her door with the ease of someone who'd lived there a while. "See you around, Jake." Over the next few weeks, their paths crossed regularly. Lisa would be checking her mail when he got home from his new job at the accounting firm downtown. Sometimes they'd end up walking up the stairs together, making small talk about the weather or the building's quirks. Jake learned that she was a graphic designer who worked with small businesses, creating logos and websites from her home office. What struck him most was how she listened. Really listened. When he mentioned having trouble finding a good coffee shop nearby, she told him about a little place 6 blocks away that roasted their own beans. When he complained about his ancient laptop running slowly, she suggested a computer repair shop that was honest and affordable. Small things, but they mattered to someone who was used to feeling invisible. Lisa had this way of remembering details too. She'd ask how his first week at the new job went or if he'd tried that coffee shop yet. It had been so long since someone paid attention to the little parts of his life that Jake sometimes felt caught off guard by her genuine interest. The building itself became familiar in the way places do when you need them to feel like home. Mrs. Chen from 2A always had her television too loud, but she made incredible dumplings that she sometimes shared with neighbors. The young couple in 3B had a baby who cried at predictable times, but they were always apologetic and kind when they passed in the hallway. The building manager, Tom, was good about fixing things quickly and never made you feel bad for asking. Jake's apartment slowly started looking less like a temporary shelter and more like a place where someone actually lived. He bought a small table for the kitchen and hung a few pictures on the walls. Nothing fancy, but enough to make the space feel like his own. The boxes got unpacked and recycled, replaced by grocery bags and library books and the normal clutter of daily life. One evening in late September, Jake was coming home with takeout from the Chinese place down the street when he found Lisa sitting on the stairs between their floors. She had her laptop open and was typing quickly, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Working late?" he asked, pausing on the step below her. She looked up and rubbed her eyes. "Client emergency. The coffee shop downstairs closed early and I need their Wi-Fi because mine decided to die at the worst possible time." She gestured at her laptop screen, which showed what looked like a colorful website design. "You can use mine if you want," Jake offered without thinking. "I mean, if it helps. I know how stressful work stuff can be." Lisa's face brightened. "Really? You wouldn't mind? I just need to upload this file and send a few emails. It would save my project deadline." "Of course. Come on up." That night, Lisa worked at Jake's kitchen table while he read on the couch. They barely spoke, but there was something comfortable about the shared space. She thanked him with genuine gratitude when she finished, and Jake realized he felt more content than he had in months, not because of romance or grand gestures, but because of simple human kindness and connection. As autumn settled over the city, their casual friendship deepened in small ways. Lisa would knock on his door when she made too much soup. Jake would offer to carry her heavy art supply deliveries up the stairs. They discovered they both liked old movies and started recommending films to each other. Nothing dramatic, just two people learning to trust again in their own quiet ways. Jake began to notice things about Lisa that went beyond neighborly politeness. The way she hummed while climbing the stairs. How she always wore this silver bracelet that caught the hallway light. The fact that she seemed to time her trips to get mail with his arrival home from work. Small details that made him wonder if maybe, just maybe, she looked forward to seeing him as much as he looked forward to seeing her. October brought cooler weather and something Jake hadn't expected. What started as simple neighbor conversations began turning into something deeper. Lisa had started inviting him to sit on her small balcony when the weather was nice, sharing coffee and talking about things that mattered. "I never thought I'd enjoy living in such a small space," Jake said one Saturday morning, looking out over the courtyard where fallen leaves were gathering in small piles. "But there's something nice about having just what you need and nothing extra." Lisa nodded, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug. "I felt the same way when I moved here 3 years ago. Sometimes starting fresh means learning what actually makes you happy, not what you think should make you happy." Her words hit Jake in a way he didn't expect. For years, he'd been trying to fit into a life that looked right on paper, but never felt right in his heart. The big house, the fancy car, the social events where he smiled but felt empty inside. Now, sitting on a tiny balcony with mismatched chairs and talking to someone who actually listened, he felt more like himself than he had in years. Their conversations flowed easily from light topics to deeper ones. Lisa told him about her art, how she'd always dreamed of being a painter but found joy in helping small businesses tell their stories through design. Jake shared his love for numbers and patterns, how accounting wasn't glamorous but gave him a sense of order and calm he needed in his life. "People think accounting must be boring," he said one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. "But there's something beautiful about making everything add up correctly. Finding the mistake that's been hiding in the numbers and fixing it. It's like solving puzzles all day." Lisa smiled. "That's not boring at all. That's like what I do with design, just with different tools. Finding the right colors and shapes to tell someone's story, making something beautiful and functional at the same time." Jake realized he was falling for her, not just because she was kind and pretty, but because she saw value in things other people overlooked. She made him feel interesting instead of ordinary, important instead of invisible. The signs were small but unmistakable. Lisa would knock on his door with fresh cookies, claiming she'd made too many but always bringing exactly 2 portions. She started wearing this soft blue sweater on days when she knew they might run into each other in the hallway. When Jake mentioned loving old jazz music, she happened to find a vintage record at a thrift store and left it by his door with a note that simply said, "Thought you might enjoy this." Jake found himself changing too. He started taking better care of his appearance, not in a vain way, but because he wanted to be the best version of himself around her. He bought flowers for his apartment, learned to cook simple meals instead of always ordering takeout, and even started reading books again instead of just watching television after work. One Thursday evening, Lisa knocked on his door looking frustrated. "My client just called with the emergency project and I'm completely out of coffee. I know it sounds silly, but I can't think properly without caffeine and all the shops are closed." "Come on," Jake said without hesitation. "Let's go to that all-night diner on 5th Street. My treat." They walked through the quiet streets, talking and laughing as their breath made small clouds in the cool air. The diner was nearly empty except for a few night shift workers and an elderly couple sharing pie. They slid into a booth by the window and ordered coffee and grilled cheese sandwiches like they were teenagers sneaking out past curfew. "You know what I love about this?" Lisa said, stirring sugar into her coffee. "How normal it feels. Like we've been friends for years instead of just a few months." Jake's heart did something funny when she said friends, but he pushed the feeling aside. Whatever this was between them, he didn't want to rush it or assume too much. The divorce had taught him that forcing feelings rarely ended well for anyone involved. "I feel the same way," he admitted. "It's been a long time since I felt this comfortable around someone new." They stayed at the diner until nearly midnight, talking about everything from childhood memories to future dreams. Jake learned that Lisa had grown up in a small town but always knew she belonged in the city. She discovered that Jake had once wanted to be a teacher, but chose accounting because it felt more practical and safe. Walking back to their building, Jake noticed how Lisa moved a little closer to him when they passed under the streetlights. How she seemed to slow down as they approached their doors, as if she didn't want the evening to end either. "Thank you," she said, fishing for her keys. "For the coffee and the conversation. You saved my project deadline and probably my sanity too." "Anytime," Jake replied, meaning it completely. "Really, anytime." She smiled at him in the dim hallway light, and for a moment Jake thought she might say something else. Instead, she squeezed his hand gently before disappearing into her apartment, leaving him standing in the hallway with his heart racing and a smile he couldn't wipe off his face. That night, lying in bed, Jake realized something had shifted between them. The careful boundaries they'd maintained were starting to blur, and for the first time since his divorce, he felt ready to be brave enough to see where those feelings might lead. 3 days passed without seeing Lisa, and Jake was starting to worry. Her design work sometimes kept her busy, but they usually crossed paths at least once a day getting mail or taking out trash. By Thursday evening, he found himself listening for footsteps in the hallway and glancing at her door every time he left his apartment. He was sitting on his couch reading the same page of his book for the third time when he heard the soft knock. Not the confident tap of a neighbor borrowing something, but a gentle, almost hesitant sound that made his heart skip. Jake opened the door to find Lisa standing in the hallway wearing a simple yellow dress he'd never seen before. Something was different about her expression. She looked nervous but determined, like someone who'd spent days working up the courage for an important conversation. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. "Of course." Jake stepped aside, suddenly aware of how ordinary his apartment must look with its basic furniture and handful of personal touches. "Is everything okay? I haven't seen you around the last few days." Lisa walked slowly into his living room but didn't sit down. Instead, she stood near the window where the evening light made her hair look golden at the edges. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "About us? About what's been happening between us?" Jake's mouth went dry. He'd been hoping for this conversation but also dreading it, afraid that putting words to their growing feelings might somehow break the spell. "Jake, I need you to know something." Lisa turned to face him fully, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made the rest of the room seem to disappear. "I've been in relationships before where I felt like I had to hide parts of myself to be accepted, where I pretended to be smaller, quieter, less complicated than I really am." She paused, taking a deep breath that seemed to steady her resolve. "With you, I feel like I can be completely honest. Like you see who I really am and don't want me to change or pretend to be someone else." Jake wanted to tell her that was exactly how she made him feel too, but something in her manner told him she needed to finish whatever she'd come to say. "I trust you," Lisa continued, her voice growing stronger, "more than I've trusted anyone in a very long time. And I want to show you that trust. I want you to see all of me, not just the careful, polite neighbor version I've been showing the world." What happened next would replay in Jake's mind for weeks afterward. Lisa moved with quiet confidence, her actions deliberate and meaningful. She wasn't trying to seduce or impress him. She was showing him something deeper than attraction. She was showing him vulnerability and trust in their purest forms. As she began to remove her dress, Jake felt overwhelmed by emotions he hadn't expected. This wasn't about desire or physical attraction, though those feelings were certainly there. This was about someone choosing to be completely open and honest with him, trusting him with her most vulnerable self. But as Lisa stood there, beautiful and brave and completely trusting, Jake felt something unexpected happen. Instead of moving toward her, instead of responding with the passion and gratitude he felt in his heart, his body froze, not from lack of desire but from the sudden crushing weight of his own insecurities. All the doubts he'd been pushing down for months crashed over him at once. What if he wasn't good enough for someone this amazing? What if he disappointed her the way he'd apparently disappointed his ex-wife? What if he was broken in ways he didn't even understand yet? Lisa smiled at him then, a smile full of hope and affection and complete trust. It was the most beautiful thing Jake had ever seen, and it terrified him completely. She was offering him everything, and he was paralyzed by the fear that he would somehow ruin it. The silence stretched between them for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Jake could see Lisa's expression beginning to change as she registered his stillness, his wide eyes, the way he seemed to be holding his breath instead of moving toward her. "Jake," she said softly, uncertainty creeping into her voice. He wanted to speak, to explain, to tell her that his freezing had nothing to do with her and everything to do with his own damaged self-worth. But the words stuck in his throat like stones. All those months of healing and growing confidence seemed to evaporate in an instant, leaving him feeling like the same broken person who'd signed divorce papers and packed his life into 3 cardboard boxes. Lisa's smile faltered. Jake watched in horror as confusion and then hurt flickered across her face. She reached quickly for her dress, her cheeks flushing with what he realized was embarrassment and rejection. "I'm sorry," she whispered, pulling the dress over her head with shaking hands. I misunderstood. I'm so sorry." "Lisa, wait." The words finally broke free from Jake's throat, but they came out as barely more than a breath. "Please." But she was already moving toward the door, not meeting his eyes, her entire posture radiating shame and regret. Jake felt like his heart was breaking as he watched the bravest, most beautiful gesture anyone had ever made toward him crumble because of his own fear and self-doubt. "I should go," Lisa said, her hand on the doorknob. "I'm really sorry. I completely misread everything." As the door closed behind her with a soft click, Jake stood alone in his living room, surrounded by the evening shadows and the crushing realization that he'd just hurt the person who meant more to him than anyone had in years, not through cruelty or indifference, but through his own inability to believe he deserved the love she was offering. Jake didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of what had happened. The look on Lisa's face when she realized he wasn't responding the way she'd hoped. The sound of her quiet apology. The way she'd hurried out of his apartment like she couldn't get away fast enough. By morning, he'd convinced himself that he'd ruined everything. Lisa probably thought he didn't find her attractive, or worse, that he'd been leading her on all these months. The truth was so much more complicated and painful. He'd frozen because she was everything he'd ever wanted, and he was terrified of not being enough for her. For 3 days, their building felt like a ghost town. Jake would listen for Lisa's footsteps in the hallway but heard nothing. When he checked his mailbox, hers remained stuffed with letters and packages. He started leaving for work earlier and coming home later, afraid of accidentally running into her and seeing rejection in her eyes. On Sunday morning, Jake was drinking coffee and trying to read the newspaper when he heard music coming through the walls. Lisa was playing something soft and melancholy on her stereo, the kind of music people listen to when they're trying to process difficult emotions. The sound made his chest ache with guilt and longing. He'd hurt someone who'd been brave enough to trust him completely. Someone who'd opened her heart and shown him something beautiful, only to have him respond with silence and fear. Jake realized he couldn't live with himself if he didn't at least try to explain. At exactly noon, he knocked on Lisa's door. The music stopped immediately, and for a long moment there was only silence. Jake was about to give up when he heard the soft sound of footsteps approaching. "Who is it?" Lisa's voice came through the door, carefully neutral. "It's Jake. Please, I know you probably don't want to see me, but I need to talk to you. I need to explain what happened the other night." Another long pause. Jake held his breath, preparing himself for rejection. Then he heard the chain sliding and the deadbolt turning. The door opened just enough for Lisa to look out at him. She was wearing an old sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back, no makeup. She looked tired and guarded, nothing like the confident woman who'd knocked on his door 3 nights ago. "Lisa, please." "Can I come in?" "I know I have no right to ask, but I can't let you think what happened was about you. It wasn't. It was about me and all my own problems." She studied his face for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she stepped back and opened the door wider. 5 minutes, she said quietly. "Then I think we should probably just go back to being neighbors who say hello in the hallway." Jake's heart sank, but he nodded. 5 minutes was more than he deserved. Lisa's apartment was the mirror image of his, but felt completely different. Where his was practical and simple, hers was full of color and personality. Art supplies were scattered across a desk by the window, and her walls were covered with paintings and designs that made the space feel alive and creative. She sat on the edge of her couch, arms crossed, waiting. Jake remained standing near the door, suddenly unsure how to begin explaining something he barely understood himself. "I know what it looked like," he started, his voice rough with 3 days of guilt and sleepless nights. "I know it seemed like I was rejecting you, or like I didn't want you, or like I'd been playing some kind of game all this time." Lisa's eyes remained fixed on a spot somewhere past his shoulder. "You don't owe me an explanation, Jake. I misread the situation. It happens." "No," Jake said more firmly. "You didn't misread anything. Everything you felt between us was real. Everything I felt was real. That's exactly the problem." This made Lisa look at him directly for the first time. "What do you mean?" Jake took a shaky breath. "When my marriage ended, it wasn't just about growing apart or wanting different things. My wife told me I was emotionally unavailable, that I never let her see who I really was inside, that living with me was like living with a stranger who was always keeping secrets, even when there were no secrets to keep." He paused, running his hands through his hair. "For 2 years I've been trying to figure out what was wrong with me, why I couldn't be the husband she needed, why I always felt like I was playing a role instead of just being myself." Lisa's expression was softening slightly, but she remained quiet, letting him continue. "Then I met you," Jake said, his voice becoming quieter, "and for the first time in my adult life I felt like someone actually saw me. The real me, not the version I thought I was supposed to be, but who I actually am inside, and it was terrifying." "Terrifying?" Lisa asked, genuine confusion in her voice. "Because what if the real me still isn't enough?" The words came out in a rush, like they'd been building pressure for months. "What if I let you in completely and you realize my ex-wife was right? What if I'm just broken in ways I don't even understand yet?" Jake felt tears threatening and fought them back. "When you stood there and trusted me with everything you are, all I could think about was how badly I wanted to be worthy of that trust. And how scared I was that I'm not." The room fell silent except for the sound of their breathing. Lisa uncrossed her arms and leaned forward slightly, studying his face with new understanding. "So when I froze," Jake continued, "it wasn't because I didn't want you. It was because I wanted you so much that I was paralyzed by the fear of messing it up, of hurting you the way I apparently hurt someone else who tried to love me." Lisa was quiet for so long that Jake started to think his 5 minutes were up. Then she spoke, her voice soft but clear. "Jake, can I tell you something about that night?" He nodded, not trusting his voice. "I wasn't just showing you my body," she said. "I was showing you my heart. I was telling you that I trust you with the parts of myself that I usually keep hidden. And when you froze, it felt like you were saying that trust wasn't worth anything." Jake felt like he'd been punched in the chest. "Lisa, that's not what I meant at all. I know that now," she said, standing up and moving to the window. "But at the time, all I could think was that I'd made the same mistake again. That I'd opened up to someone who wasn't ready to open up back." She turned to face him, and Jake was surprised to see tears in her eyes. "I've been hurt before too, Jake. I've been with people who wanted me to be smaller, quieter, less complicated than I really am. People who liked the idea of me, but not the reality." "You're not complicated," Jake protested. "You're amazing." "I am complicated," Lisa said with a small smile. "So are you. So is everyone worth knowing. The question is whether we're brave enough to be complicated together." The conversation that started in Lisa's living room continued for hours. They talked until the afternoon sun faded into evening, sharing stories they'd never told anyone else. Jake learned that Lisa's confidence was something she'd had to build deliberately after years of being told she was too much, too intense, too different. Lisa discovered that Jake's careful nature came from growing up in a house where emotions were seen as problems to be solved, rather than feelings to be understood. They didn't fix everything that day, but they began to understand each other in ways that went deeper than attraction or even love. They saw each other's scars and fears, and instead of running away, they chose to stay and figure it out together. The weeks that followed weren't like a fairy tale where everything suddenly became perfect. Real healing takes time, and trust has to be built one small moment at a time. Jake started seeing a counselor to work through his fears about relationships and intimacy. Lisa began setting clearer boundaries about her own needs and expectations. They took things slowly, learning to communicate in ways that felt honest and safe for both of them. When Jake felt himself starting to withdraw, he learned to say so instead of just going quiet. When Lisa felt like she was being too much or too intense, she learned to ask directly if Jake was feeling overwhelmed instead of pulling away. Some evenings, They would sit on Lisa's balcony talking about their days like they had before. But now there was a different quality to their conversations. They were building something together, brick by brick, without rushing or forcing the process. Jake learned to see himself through Lisa's eyes. Not as a failed husband or someone who was emotionally broken, but as a kind, thoughtful man who was still learning how to love and be loved in healthy ways. Lisa learned to trust that Jake's quiet nature didn't mean he was hiding from her, but that he processed emotions differently than she did. 2 months after their difficult conversation, Jake knocked on Lisa's door with a small wrapped package. When she opened it, she found a key to his apartment along with a note that said, "For emergencies, late-night work deadlines, or whenever you want to feel at home." Lisa smiled and disappeared into her apartment for a moment, returning with her own small gift. It was a painting she'd been working on, showing the view from their building's roof at sunset, with 2 small figures sitting close together on the edge. "I go up there sometimes to think," she explained. "I kept imagining what it would be like to share that view with someone who understood what they were seeing." That night, they climbed the narrow stairs to the roof together. The city spread out below them, millions of lights twinkling in windows where other people were living their own complicated, beautiful lives. Jake reached for Lisa's hand, and this time he didn't freeze. This time he was ready to be brave enough to love and be loved in return. "You know what I realized?" Lisa said, leaning against his shoulder as they watched the traffic move through the streets below. "What?" "That night when you froze, you weren't rejecting me. You were having the same feeling I was having, like this was too important to mess up. Like we both knew we were standing at the edge of something that could change everything." Jake squeezed her hand gently. "I was terrified of not being enough for you, and I was terrified of being too much for you." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city settle into night around them. Jake thought about the man he'd been when he first moved into apartment 4B, carrying everything he owned in 3 cardboard boxes and convinced he was broken beyond repair. That man could never have imagined sitting on a rooftop with someone who loved not just his good qualities, but his fears and flaws and complicated emotions too. "I love you," he said quietly, the words coming easier than he'd expected. "I love you too," Lisa replied. "All of you. Even the parts you think need fixing." 6 months later, they were painting the walls of Jake's apartment together, officially combining their lives in the space where they'd first learned to trust each other. Lisa's art supplies had taken over the spare bedroom, and Jake's books were mixed in with hers on the shelves they'd built together. As Jake rolled paint over a wall that had once felt temporary and impersonal, he thought about doors. How Lisa had knocked on his that first night when her internet went out. How he'd opened it without hesitation, not knowing it was the beginning of everything changing. How she'd opened her door slowly that evening in October, trusting him with her whole heart. "What are you smiling about?" Lisa asked, paint smudge on her cheek and happiness in her eyes. "Just thinking about doors," Jake replied. "How they can be scary to open sometimes, but the best things in life usually happen when we're brave enough to turn the handle." Lisa set down her paintbrush and crossed the room to where Jake was working. She took his face in her hands, paint-stained fingers gentle against his skin. "I'm glad you finally learned how to open yours," she said, before kissing him in the afternoon light streaming through their windows. Later that evening, as they sat on their shared balcony eating takeout and planning their next home improvement project, Jake realized he'd finally learned the difference between being alone and being lonely. He'd also learned that the right person doesn't fix your broken pieces, but loves you enough to help you put them back together yourself. Some stories end with grand gestures and dramatic declarations. This one ended with 2 people choosing each other every day, building a life together one small, brave decision at a time, learning that love isn't about being perfect but about being honest, not about having all the answers but about being willing to figure them out together. And every time they walked up the stairs to their apartment, past the door where everything began, they remembered that the most important moments in life often start with someone being brave enough to knock, and someone else being ready to answer.